Item number 44, providing for the extension of the city limits of the city of Baton Rouge and inclusion of the area described in the petition for annexation submitted by 8555 United Plaza, LLC, Sterling United Plaza Boulevard, LLC, Sterling 1 United Plaza, LLC, Sterling 2 United Plaza, LLC, Sterling 8 United Plaza, LLC, Sterling 12 United Plaza, LLC, and Louisiana School Employees Retirement System in accordance with Louisiana Revised Statute 33-172A1A and Section 1.09 of the Plan of Government by Council Administrative Treasurer. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this item? Mr. Landry.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. Charles Landry as the applicant representing all of the entities that are identified on item 44. I'm also representing Turner, who is the item on 45. Will be the same issue. It was just a question of timing on when we could file the application. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a graphic, it's pretty straightforward. This is Essen, in essence, the city. This piece of road is owned by the city parish. This piece of road is maintained by the city parish, has separate ownership, and everything in red and the yellow is part of these two applications for annexation. Very, very simply, this is not a question of anything to do with St. George and who might be involved with the St. George administration. It has to do with you. We, as property owners, in this case, I'm not here as a lawyer, I'm the managing partner for United Plaza. We would rather maintain the status quo. We'd rather have the mayor as our mayor. We'd rather have this council as our council. We'd rather have Fred Rayford and the rest of DPW as our DPW and have that certainty. That's it. It does cost us more for us to come into the city, but that cost is related to public transportation, which everyone on this list supports. So we would respectfully ask you to allow us to continue our relationship that we have with the city parish, albeit as members of the city alone, and go forward. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I would have the same identical comments for the next item to make it simple. I have all the representatives of the owners are here to further answer any questions that you have. I respectfully ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. I have speaker card for wishing to speak in opposition, Norman Browning. Norman Browning. Could you give us your name and your address for the record, please?
All right, good evening. My name's Norman Browning. I reside at 15955 Confederate Avenue, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, soon to be St. George. I am chairman of the petition to incorporate the city of St. George. I reside in and a resident and registered voter within the St. George boundaries. I signed the petition to incorporate the city of St. George on October 12, 2019. I voted in favor of the incorporations of St. George. I am here to object to the proposed annexation of the city of Baton Rouge of public and private properties within the boundaries in the petition to incorporate the city of St. George and in the proclamation calling the election to incorporate St. George. The petition to incorporate the city of St. George was endorsed by the Louisiana Secretary of State on March 2nd, 2018, then submitted to the East Baton Rouge Parish Registrar of Voters on October 15, 2018 for verification. It was verified by the East Baton Rouge Parish Registrar of Voters as having 14,585 signatures of registered voters on February 25th, 2019. It was then reviewed by the governor, who determined that the law required him to call a special election on the issue of incorporating the city of St. George. On March 29, 2019, Governor Evers, at the request of Mayor President Broome, who asserted that May 4, 2019 election would be too soon to educate the voters regarding the incorporation, issued a proclamation calling the election to be conducted on October 12, 2019, rather than on May
Mr. Browning,
4th.
let me caution you, this is not about the city of St. George or the election, this is about annexation.
Yes.
So kind of asking you to stay on target with where the topic is. It's not about St. George.
And this is about the annexation.
It's about the annexation of
Yes,
property
because
into
it all
the
has
city
to
of Baton
do.
Rouge.
It all has to do with the annexation of St. George.
I'm sorry. Okay, you have 30 seconds left to wrap it up.
So the boundaries of the city of St. George established in the petition and in proclamation cannot be unilaterally altered by the council. The issue of incorporation of the city of St. George with the boundaries as set forth in the petition and proclamation was approved by the electorate and cannot be unilaterally altered. Despite receiving voter approval, the incorporation of the city of St. George is being challenged by a lawsuit by Lamont Colt, a member of the council, and by Mayor President Broome, who seeks to overturn the election.
Okay, I'm going to need you to wrap it up. Your time is up.
Well, we are opposed to it.
I would
Okay.
ask that
We
you
do-
give an additional 30 seconds because he was interrupted.
I've given him an extra 30 seconds because his clock has already been gone. So your time is up, sir. Thank you. I want to just, you can stay there for 1 second. I want to get the parish attorney's office, somebody from the parish attorney's office to come up real quick to address the issue of the item on the agenda as it relates to annexation and the city of St. George.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am. So the question is, how does it relate?
Yeah, so the item on the agenda is for the annexation of different properties into the city of Baton Rouge, and his argument was about not having the ability to do it because it's a part of the lines that were drawn for the proposed city of St. George.
The way that we see it is that the statute, there's a Louisiana revised statute that provides the ability for any individual who lives outside of the city limits to apply to come within the city limits, irregardless of any election or anything of that nature. As long as they meet the requisite criteria, they have the ability to seek annexation into the city limits. It's that simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Courtney, did you have something to add? Or no? You're good? No. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So next, I recognize the next speaker is Chris Riles. Who wants to speak in opposition? Chris, Mr. Riles? Okay. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to address the Metro Council. I'll be less than 3 minutes. The City of St. George organizers anticipated a successful October 2019 election, and we worked with our legislators in both the House and the Senate to create the St. George Transition District that was approved by the legislature in that 2019 session. In June 2019, Mayor Broome called the transition bill, quote, premature. Quote, for me to do anything prior to the election is not appropriate. Once the election takes place, then future conversations can take place. On June 21st, 2019, the governor vetoed the St. George Transition District, saying, quote, that this legislation is unnecessary at this point in time and presupposes a result of an election that is yet to take place, and that if the voters approve of a newly incorporated city of St. George, there should be, and I want to emphasize these 3 words from the governor, thoughtful, fair, and equitable transition process. This transition structure can be set at that time through a cooperative endeavor agreement between the parish and the municipality. On October 12, 2019, the city of St. George was approved by 54% of the voters to create the largest city in the history of Louisiana and the 3rd largest city ever incorporated in this nation. Rather than enter into meaningful conversations with St. George organizers, Mayor Broome elected to sue Norman Browning and me.
Okay, I'm gonna have to stop you and caution you again. This is not about the election or the city of St. George, but it's about annexation of property. Our parish attorney's office just informed us that if anyone meets the guidelines and applies to be included in the city of Baton Rouge, it has to be considered by this body. This is not about St. George. It is not about the election.
Point of order, and I'll ask the parish attorney's office to come up as well.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, I have 30 seconds left for my statement.
I'll give you your time back. I will give you
Chris.
your time back when the parish attorney's office comes back up to address the issue.
Respectfully, Mayor
Yes.
Pro Tem, I will say that these issues are absolutely connected. We would not be talking about annexation if it weren't for the city of St. George. Andy, I don't think that you answered her original question as to what she was talking about. She was not asking for the statute that allows annexation. She was talking about their ability to talk about St. George on this issue.
I don't make that decision.
And let me just say this: when it's my turn to speak, I'm going to talk about St. George. So,
Okay, but it's not. First of all,
I'm not going to be stopped.
First of all, it's not your turn to speak. Number one, I was recognizing you, but this gentleman had the floor, so you called for the parish attorney's office to come up to clarify once again the. Yeah. Thank you, Lamont. And as the city mayor pro tem, I can make the decision whether this is germane to the item or not. Mr. Dawson,
yes,
Parish
ma'am.
Attorney Dawson, I will ask you again, what does the city of St. George in the election have to do with this item on the agenda for annexation into the city of Baton Rouge?
And I understood the question, Councilman Hudson. The point I'm making is this. I'm not trying to get into that the election or anything of that nature. The bottom line is the Louisiana Revised Statutes provide a process by which any person, company, anyone who wants to seek annexation into the city can do so if they follow the requisite criteria. It doesn't have to be what they do it or why they do it. I can't put myself into the shoes of that individual to ascertain why they did it. That's not my responsibility. The responsibility of this body is to ensure that the application meets the requisite criteria of the statute, and if it does, then they vote upon it, and if the vote is favorable, the person is annexed into the city. The Mall of Louisiana, all these other places were done outside of any kind of consideration of the election of St. George. So that's the full breadth of my answer, but that's the answer.
I understand your answer to that part of it. I think the question is whether or not them mentioning the word St. George can be germane to this item.
That's a question for the mayor pro tem.
And I have decided,
not
as
for
the
me.
mayor pro tem sitting this afternoon, that it is not germane to the item of being annexed into the city. If we were considering doing something illegal because of the election in St. George, that would be one situation. If you are telling us as our parish attorney that we are not violating any ordinance or any law by considering this item, then the city of St. George has nothing to do with this item of annexation. That is my decision as the mayor pro tem, and I'm going to stand with that. And I'm going to ask everybody in this room and on this body to be respectful.
And I will absolutely do.
Okay, so I'm going to give this gentleman, after you can give him back another minute on the floor to complete his comments. I'm going to ask my colleagues, if you wish to speak on this item, to put your name in rotation, and I will recognize you at that time.
Donna,
Thank you.
I just ask a point of personal privilege, just because
Yes, sir.
I'm less clear about whether or not we've talked about the annexation. My concern isn't that. I think what my biggest concern legally is whether or not we are able to have what is in effect. Is this not a de-annexation of one city into annexation of another city? And that's what I need there.
Councilman Welch, I'm going to let this gentleman finish, and then I'll give you your time to speak. Because your point of order, we've already asked if you had something else for the parish attorney.
But he hadn't answered the question.
Who has not answered the question?
The parish attorney.
In my opinion, he has answered the question that this item has nothing to do with the election of the city of St. George. And this item can be presented to this body for consideration, irrespective of the fact that there was an election.
Yes, ma'am. I agree with that. Whether we can talk about it or not, that's not the issue for me, anyway.
Okay.
The issue for me is that could someone who is in the city of Baker, who has a coterminus with the city of Zachary, decide they want to be in the city of Zachary and go away from the other city?
Okay, so I will allow you to ask that.
That's what I want to know.
When it's your turn to talk. I'm sorry, Mr.
Everybody else got time.
Right. Yeah, but we're going to be all over the place and nobody's going to get, so I'm going to give
My
you.
final comments are less than 1 minute.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir.
To borrow Mayor Frey's words, it is premature for the Metro Council to consider annexations into the city of Baton Rouge that are currently in the elected city of St. George boundaries. The businesses and individuals represented in today's request, they have literally had decades to ask to be a part of the Baton Rouge City Corporation for their privilege to pay 17.5 mils more in property taxes. I respectfully ask that you reject today's request and let the courts rule on the validity of the city of St. George, content that is consistent with the intent of Mayor Broom's lawsuit. This is not a thoughtful, fair, and equitable transition process being considered today while the St. George's Corporation is being challenged in the courts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker I have is Andrew Murrell. Mr. Murrell, you have 3 minutes.
Andrew Murrell, 4775 Fleet, St. George, Louisiana, 70809. A couple of comments. I think the council will be happy. I'm going to make something that's not St. George related for half my comment. One, that it's premature for Baton Rouge to consider annexation. As a group who loves to commission studies, there's not been a study done to determine the impact on the city of Baton Rouge from annexing additional properties. Can Baton Rouge, the city of Baton Rouge, provide services to these properties? It's failed to do so with its previous annexations. What is the cost of providing those additional services? And the cost of those additional services, what is the impact on the ratings for our law enforcement and first responders and their ratings? How will that affect the home insurance premiums for the residents of Baton Rouge by annexing additional property and stretching thin an already understaffed police force? These are issues I think deserve and merit additional study by East Baton Rouge Parish and the city of Baton Rouge. We're not talking about something that's going to take dollars out of the parish no matter what municipality these businesses and these properties remain in. There's still going to be an East Baton Rouge Parish. So taking a little extra time, as Mr. Riles pointed out, they've had decades to do a petition for annexation. Taking additional time for the city and parish to study this matter might benefit everyone, to find out exactly what the impact of adding additional, not just businesses, but roadways. There's an additional cost for the maintenance for these areas, and a city parish budget that's already stretched thin, last time I checked, is now the city of Baton Rouge is going to be stretched even thinner by annexing additional properties. Second, sorry, I'm going back to St. George because the boundaries of St. George were set with these businesses included. They are subject of litigation, and the other part of that is it's not just the boundaries, it's also whether or not we can provide those services within those boundaries. It's subject to litigation, and what that litigation will do is change the procedural mechanism for annexation. As Councilman Welch pointed out, there is a different mechanism for annexation out of de-annexing from one municipality and being annexed into another as opposed to annexing from an unincorporated area. So if this lawsuit comes out and at the end of the day we're incorporated, it could have changed the mechanism by which you do annex property, which means all the annexations this body is considering would be null and void. So instead of doing something now that has to be undone later, it might behoove the Metro Council to just defer this matter until the end of litigation. And hey, St. George may not be a reality and we don't have to have this conversation. But if it is, at least you've done it in the right manner, the right procedure, and the right mechanism. So save yourself some time and trouble, but if you're going to take the time and trouble, let's put it towards something that's useful, a study to determine the impact and benefit or drawbacks of this annexation. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on this item?
Gary Chambers, Mickens Road, District 5. I wasn't going to say anything about this until Councilwoman Lewis was disrespected. First of all, my opinion, I fully support a business making the decision for their business which city they want to pay their taxes to. That's number one. Number two, in all the years that I saw Mr. Wilson run the council meeting and somebody talk off subject, I've never seen you defend anybody until it was a white guy supporting what you support. I remember being arrested here for speaking off subject that wasn't germane. But this guy, you defended. And this speaks to the bias of this council
Okay, I'm going to have to bring you back around to you.
He disrespected.
And I agree with that.
So, thank you, Councilman Cole, for having the courage to correct that. Because too often
Gary,
here,
I'm going to have to direct you back to that.
too often here, we allow one perspective to rule over all perspectives. To say that St. George is, or annexing into Baton Rouge is a problem, well, Central has existed for however long they have, and the city of Baton Rouge citizens still pay for the sheriff's department out there, right? Because they don't pay their fair share. We found that out through St. George. And so we don't know how resources by this city have been spent on other municipalities that we continue to serve that have decided they don't want to be a part of this anymore. So if any tax-paying business owner decides what government they want to pay their taxes to, you guys, pro-business people, should support those businesses and their wishes. Why do you want to control whether or not they pay taxes to you in St. George or to the city of Baton Rouge, as long as they're paying their taxes, right? That's what you want, the money. You don't actually want inclusion and equity and progress, because we had the opportunities for those things and we never do it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on this item? I'm going to close the public hearing and recognize Councilman Welch.
Andy, come on, brother. How's this? I mean, I understand whenever, we've done annexations in the past where it was an unincorporated area that petitioned and asked to come into the city, but that isn't what it seems like in this case. How is this? I'm looking through Westlaw, and I'm seeing where it does not authorize a court to enter a judgment of de-annexation or to order a municipality to pass an ordinance of de-annexation. Is it our position that there is no city of St. George, even though there's been an election?
They have not been certified, Councilman. They have not been properly or fully incorporated yet. That certification process has not occurred.
So
the election is the first step.
Right.
And then you have to go through the process of being certified and then incorporate properly or formally incorporated. That has not occurred yet.
All right.
So as of right now, that area that Mr. Landry represents and these other people are petitioning for is still an unincorporated area of East Baton Rouge Parish seeking to be incorporated into the city limits right now.
So the next step, even though there's been an election, is the certification. What's holding up the certification?
A lawsuit.
Whose lawsuit?
The lawsuit that was filed challenging the annexation, challenging the incorporation or the vote of the incorporation of St. George. And
that was done by an ordinance or from the city parish?
I'm not part of that lawsuit, Councilman, so I can't tell you. You have to ask the people who filed it. I didn't file it.
I got you.
So I can't tell you that. All I can tell you is that these group of individuals, as of today, January 8, 2020, are in an unincorporated area of East Baton Rouge Parish seeking annexation into the city limits of Baton Rouge. And by all intents and purposes, that application has met the statutory requirements and is before this council to vote as to whether or not they approve it.
So what's the timeline on? What's the timeline?
There is no.
What's the timeline on? Because there was an election.
There was an election, but there's a suit challenging the election.
I got that.
Yeah,
I understand that.
Okay,
but what's the timeline? There's a suit. I get it.
Yeah.
I may have something to know about suits.
A little bit. Since we went to law school together.
So cool. Right, exactly. So, but my point is that this is a little bit different of a situation to me. That's all.
All I can tell you is, for us to get into trying to look at intents and purposes and
I'm not looking at.
Hold on, let me say this. I'm getting to a point. Okay. I'm sorry. To look at intents and purposes and what it could be and what it can't be. The facts at this time, and I hate to be circular, but the facts at this time are that these individuals who are petitioning to be annexed into the city are part of the unincorporated part of East Baton Rouge Parish, and St. George has not been incorporated at this time.
So are you telling me that there's kind of, because of this petition? Now, let me ask you this question, because this is important. Is it almost like a grace period with people who are in a city and out of a city, and if they've got, because there are people who that want to be in the city of Baton Rouge that are in the middle of St. George, and you got people who, same sort of thing. They obviously can't do that.
Because they don't meet the statutory requirements.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. So we can't even consider those.
Not unless they meet the revised
I got
statute
you.
requirements. Yes, sir.
So my other question is that if we do this, okay, and it ultimately gets certified, does it relate back to the election?
I have not done the research on that, but from what I'm telling you now, and based on everything I know, I don't think there can be a relation back. We're talking. All we have to do, and all the law requires, and I know you know this as well. I don't mean to be elementary with you about this. Is that we have to look at the status at where we are right now, the status of the individual at this time.
Does it later on? Is there a possibility of an order to de-annex and re-annex back into the city of St. George?
That's something I can't answer right now because I don't
The
know.
reason
I don't know
I'm
what's
asking
going to
that is because right now it's status quo. I mean, what's being paid into the city of Baton Rouge and to the parish of East Baton Rouge is the exact same as what's being done right now. Until there's an election, until there's a certification, and ultimately we still don't know where we're at. I mean, is there a situation where we're going to end up having to undo everything that we're doing tonight?
Again, I think that goes back to the first question you asked me. All I can tell you is, at this time, these individuals, or the status of these individuals, or where they have met the statute and they're going in. Whatever anybody seeks to do or unwind after there is a certification, is up to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilman Hudson.
I'm going to take a quick point of personal privilege and address the Mayor Pro Tem, the Acting Mayor Pro Tem. Councilwoman Lewis, if you felt that I disrespected you, then I apologize for that. I will tell you, I responded to you the way I did because two of those folks are my constituents, and I felt like their ability to speak on a public item was possibly being violated. I would have done that if it was Councilman Wilson, anyone up here. So if you felt that I disrespected you, I apologize
do feel that you disrespected me, and plus I had asked the parish attorney before I made the statement to them that I didn't think it was germane. And plus my council administrator sitting to my right said that you need to maybe caution him that he is not speaking to the item on the agenda. And that's when I called the parish attorney's office up. I'm never going to violate anybody's right to speak on any subject, any matter in this council chamber.
Gotcha.
And so I do feel like it was very disrespectful.
Just know that was my heart on it.
Yes.
Please don't take it personal.
Thanks.
Andy, if you would come back up real quick. Yeah, you might want to find a chair. I don't know. Andy, when the City of Central process went through, it's my understanding that their lawsuit, once it wrapped up, the judge ordered that their certification or incorporation date was 2 years prior to the certification of the election. If that is to transpire with the current suit, which the current suit is not challenging the election process, it's challenging the reasonableness of the incorporation. But if that is to transpire with this, do we not run into the issue with that Councilman Welch is discussing, where we might have to unwind this?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. You're asking me to look into the future and answer facts and make decisions that I don't know with information I don't have. All I can do is I can tell you that whatever the judge decides to do, whatever ruling he makes, we'll have to deal with it when that ruling comes and whatever information they provide. I don't know what the circumstances were at that time that required that judge to do that. I don't know if that was an agreement of the parties when the judge decided to make the judgment. We don't know what the basis was for that ruling. We don't know that's going to be applicable here. That's things I just can't answer at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Charles, if you would come up and just address the question. You and I spoke about this a little bit before the meeting. You're aware of that issue.
Yes, sir.
If that does transpire,
it absolutely does not get undone. All right. Can I read?
Sure.
The notice of the results of the election shall also state the name of the municipality. The municipality will be legally incorporated, shall be legally incorporated 30 days from the date of the publication unless a legal action contesting the incorporation is filed within the 30-day period. So to my colleague, Councilmember Welsh, there will never be an undo. All right? It's the process is suspended while the litigation is pending.
right, because you are the only applicant that has filed for annexation within the 30-day window, correct?
Right, but it's irrelevant. That is correct, but it also is irrelevant. Any applicant will be able to file while the litigation is pending. The statute is perfectly clear that the incorporation, our city parish attorney is correct, is suspended under the statute very clearly until the litigation is completed. And I'll be happy to read the legislation.
No, that's
okay, and so going back to Councilmember Welsh, no, sir. There will absolutely, irrespective of the result, if the lawsuit is dismissed, all right, then the incorporation process proceeds. And what happened in the interim is going to stay, all right? So that's why you're likely going to see a number of people asking for annexation during this period of time while the litigation is pending. Because under the state statute, while the litigation is pending, the incorporation is not complete.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Daryl, if you guys would come up and talk a little bit about the due diligence that was done for this annexation. And I really, not just for this one, but I want to know what our procedure is as we look at future annexations. This is one right in front of us here tonight, but I'm worried about, kind of a piecemeal approach as these come to hit us. So, the lawsuit is challenging.
Councilman Hudson, would you like your additional time?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Thank you.
The lawsuit is challenging the reasonableness of the St. George Incorporation. My question is, what are we looking at for reasonableness of annexations? What criteria are we looking for? What due diligence are we doing?
All we can actually look at is what the law requires. Like Andy said, if it meets the statute, the requirements that it's adjacent to the city limits, et cetera. In the incorporation, in the process, Ashley could probably address this better than me. The departments all have to report back on what the financial impact would be. Would there be a financial impact in terms of the operation of the department? Would be a hardship. I think that's included in the documents that were presented. And if I'm not mistaken, there really is no financial impact. Linda has actually gone through those numbers also to verify that. Okay. We pick up extra revenue in some cases that would come to the city. I don't think we were able to go through sales tax numbers, but any of the sales tax revenues really come to the city coffers, or part of those two.
Yeah, I don't think we have sales tax not on this particular one.
There may be a few things in there, but not a lot.
Okay. Look, and that's it, Daryl. Thank you. I respect the right of a property owner. If you want to be in the city of Baton Rouge, that's your prerogative. I'm all for it. I want to make sure that this issue is done correctly, and I think we're on a good track to do that here. I do worry that there will be an issue in the future, but that'll be something to do with in the future. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Councilman Watson.
Thank you, Acting Pro Tem. These properties are all located in District 11. I have the honor of having about 50% of my district inside the city limits of Baton Rouge, 10% still unincorporated pockets, and 40% what would someday probably be in the city of St. George. I've got a long border between the city of Baton Rouge and the area that's entangled in a lawsuit that I don't really find much validity to the lawsuit, but I'm not the one who's waging this war in the lawsuit. However, in so much as what our parish attorney has said, that everything's frozen where it is right now, I have to respect the property owners in this property that are asking to be annexed into the city as much as I would have to respect the property owners that were on the other side of the border that wanted to get annexed into St. George if that was ever to be the case. I am up here to give accurate information as quickly as possible to every single person that lives in my district, whether they are for St. George, asking just mere questions about the process, or want to be part of the city of Baton Rouge. I know a lot of people who did not, to address this, they've had decades to get inside Baton Rouge. Chris Riles, you're absolutely correct. They did have decades to do that. But there are folks that just crossed their fingers and maybe didn't want to create the city of St. George and didn't do anything, and then now they're motivated by that. So I do think that there is definitely a tie-in with the city of St. George. Now, in my discussion with Fred, and I think Councilman Hudson brought it up with Daryl. The municipality already owns United Plaza Boulevard, part of it, and through some deal that was made some years ago, Fred, if you could come up quickly and speak on this, maintains the rest of that. And so when it comes to doing a study of what additional costs there might be to the city of Baton Rouge, we're kind of already paying, as far as the city being the city is already paying for those maintenance costs in there, even on a road that they didn't own. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So do you see from your drainage, transportation and drainage aspect, any increase in expenditure that you'd have to do?
I would say at this time, Councilman, no, only by the fact I'm not sure exactly if St. George moves through, then what are the services that they're going to be requesting, and then those things will start breaking out dollars and cents and where we need to be. But at this point, maintenance-wise, we're good.
Okay, let me ask you something else of specific.
Yes.
Behind United Plaza is Wards Creek, and it's in the worst condition back there. The big plates of concrete are falling apart and everything. Who's going to, in your mind, hazard a guess, who's responsible for the maintenance on that was in a terrible condition 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and will be in terrible condition unless that's remedied?
It will
Is
be
that part
ultimately
of
the parish. It's part of the tributaries project.
Yeah.
And the question that we're debating now only is, are we going to go back and actually concrete line it, or come back and make renovations to, take it out and do widening of channels? That's the only question. But it's part of the tributaries project, which everybody's participating in.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Fred. The situation that I find myself in is not one of pro St. George or pro Baton Rouge, but pro the specific property owner who, as it's been played out in the questions asked of the parish attorney and the stalling of the certification of St. George, these folks have the right to ask to be annexed into the city of Baton Rouge. Just as much as I would protect the folks as much as I could, I can't do anything to stop the lawsuit that's trying to slow St. George down. But in this case, I'm here to vote on this annexation. And because they're afforded that legal remedy to what they want to do with their property right now, I have to vote to allow these people to be annexed into the city of Baton Rouge. At this point right now, that's where we are. So I'll make the motion that we approve this. Thank you.
Motion by Councilman Watson to approve the annexation. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Cole. Councilman Welch.
So it's my understanding, Andy, that the only way in which to challenge an annexation that we're doing is for them to file a suit within 30 days of this.
In theory, that would be correct. I don't like to give legal advice.
No, I'm not asking that. But that from what I'm seeing is
until it's
that,
formalized. That's correct.
Right. So that's the only way to attack it. I mean, if you wanted to.
They'd have to make their decision, but it's 30 days before it's formalized. That's correct.
Okay. And we've always, anybody that's ever petitioned, are you aware of any petition that we've said no to?
Not that I'm aware of. No, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to use my time and try to keep this, as I know Councilwoman Wicker would probably say, decent and in order. I was, first of all, offended by Councilman Hudson's comments. I have, and Councilman Watson, I know I'm the acting mayor pro tem. I realize that. I understand that, but this is my 5 minutes. But that's 2 points. Councilman Wilson has sat in this seat for the last 3 years, and if he determined an item was not germane, the discussion was not germane to the item, in his opinion, as the mayor pro tem, it had to be respected. And for you, Councilman Hudson, to sit up there and say before this body and this audience that you're going to talk about it anyway when it's your time was very disrespectful. You said that if it was disrespectful, you never apologized for it. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm fine without it. But sitting in this seat, I deserve to be respected just as if it were Councilman Wilson in the same position. I made the decision not on my own. I called up our parish attorney who gave us the recommendation, and it continued to be questioned as to whether or not they had the legal responsibility, the legal right to be petitioned to be annexed into the city of Baton Rouge. Again, this was still, even though I allowed it, even after much saying that I wasn't going to, this conversation still was not about the city of St. George. And I wanted to make sure again with our parish attorney before I said that it wasn't. But to continue to have had the conversation, Councilman Wilson probably would have put a bunch of folks out of this chamber by now, or asked them to be removed from here, or be removed from the podium. So that was very disrespectful from my colleagues and anybody else that I asked not to continue to talk about it, but talked about it anyway. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. There's been a motion on the floor by Councilman Watson to approve, second by Councilman Cole. Are there any objections? Seeing none, item number 44 has been approved.